Hello wanderers, and welcome to Night's Embrace. In tonight's video, we will journey through the rich lore of Fallout's power armor, those iconic mechanized suits that turn ordinary soldiers into walking tanks. Before we begin, make yourself comfortable and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Now relax as we delve into the history and secrets of power armor in the Fallout universe. Power armor in Fallout is a pinnacle of engineering, a powered exoskeleton designed to protect its wearer and enhance their strength to superhuman levels. These suits are far more than just heavy armor. They are self-contained combat platforms, outfitted with servo motors and hydraulic frames. A power armor allows a single infantryman to carry heavy weapons, shrug off incoming fire, and survive in environments that would be lethal to an unarmored person. Throughout the Fallout world's history, the development and deployment of power armor changed the face of warfare, and even long after the world's end, these suits remain treasured relics, fought over by those who seek the power they confer. In this comprehensive lore exploration, we will cover the origins of power armor before the Great War, the various models developed by the United States military, such as the T-45, T-51, and T-60, the experimental prototypes like the mysterious X-01, and the post-war evolution of advanced suits by factions like the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave. We'll also touch on how other groups and survivors have used or repurposed power armor in the wasteland. So close your eyes if you wish and imagine the whir of servo motors and the thud of metal footsteps as we step into the armored shell of Fallout's power armor lore. Origins of power armor, war, and invention. To understand power armor, we must step back to the world before the Great War, a world much like our own, but one that diverged in technology and history. By the mid-21st century, global tensions over resources had reached a boiling point. The United States and China were the two superpowers vying for the last reserves of oil and uranium. In the Fallout timeline, China launched an invasion of Alaska in the winter of 2066, seeking to seize the rich oil fields there. The conflict that followed, known as the Sino-American War, forced American military planners to seek new ways to equip their soldiers for a grueling years-long war. At the time, conventional infantry armor was no match for the heavy firepower being exchanged on the battlefields. Military turned to West Tech, a prominent defense contractor and research company, to develop something revolutionary: armor that could make a single soldier as effective as an entire squad. West Tech's engineers had already been working on powered exoskeleton concepts, and with the outbreak of war, they were given a massive contract to accelerate their research. The result of their crash program was the T-45 power armor, the first of its kind. The T-45, America's first power armor. In 2067, barely a year after the Alaska invasion, the initial models of T-45 powered infantry armor were rushed to the front lines. This was an astonishing technological leap, made in an incredibly short time. The T-45 was a bulky steel exoskeleton that encased its operator, augmented by a framework of hydraulics and servo motors. Soldiers wearing T-45 armor could carry heavy weapons that normally took multiple people to operate, and they were shielded by steel plating thick enough to stop most small arms fire. The first deployment of T-45 suits took place on the Alaskan front, where American troops were struggling to hold back waves of Chinese attackers. The impact was immediate and game-changing. Although the early T-45 models were lacking in mobility, the wearers often described the suit as slow or cumbersome. They allowed a single power-armored soldier to wade into battle wielding high-caliber machine guns or even portable rocket launchers with ease. Chinese infantry and even tanks found themselves facing opponents that could absorb punishment and dish it out in equal measure. In many ways, the T-45 changed the nature of modern warfare overnight. What had been a conventional war transformed into something reminiscent of science fiction, towering armored figures marching through gunfire. The Chinese, stunned by the appearance of American power-armored troops, scrambled to develop their own versions of powered combat armor. However, they were years behind and struggled to catch up. Meanwhile, American scientists anticipated that their enemies might try to counter power armor with new technology. For instance, the US invested in developing electromagnetic pulse (EMP) weapons as a contingency to disable any enemy power armor if it ever appeared. But during those early years, no comparable Chinese suit made it to the battlefield. The T-45 reigned supreme, giving American forces a crucial edge. Despite its success, the T-45 was something of a stopgap solution. It was the first operational power armor ever built, pressed into service less than 2 years after research had begun. As a result, it used a lot of existing technology and had notable limitations. For example, initial versions of the T-45 ran on small energy cells, which provided only limited operational time. The armor's energy consumption was alarming, quickly draining its power supply. To address this, later models of the T-45 incorporated a back-mounted TX-28 microfusion pack, a small fusion reactor, instead of bulky batteries. This fusion core system allowed the armor to run far longer and with more power, letting soldiers operate for extended periods and power the suit's servos continuously without swapping out batteries. This was a critical improvement, essentially giving the T-45 a long-term power source on the battlefield. Physically, a T-45 suit consists of multiple layers. Inside, the operator wears a padded bodysuit for comfort and insulation. Over that is a form-fitting undersuit, sometimes referred to as recon, when worn alone, made of thick, reinforced fabric and some plating. This undersuit contains the attachment points for the outer armor and the suit's internal machinery. The final layer is the external armored shell, plates of hardened steel covering the body, along with the integrated hydraulics, servo motors, and the fusion power pack on the back. The iconic helmet of the T-45 includes a narrow visor slit, protected by bullet-resistant glass, and an integrated filtration system for NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical protection, as well as audio sensors and a headlamp for seeing in darkness. In essence, the soldier is completely sealed inside, able to survive in contaminated environments, and protected from both bullets and toxins. The ability of a T-45 armored trooper to operate crew-served weapons, like heavy machine guns that normally require a team by themselves, was one of its biggest advantages. Entire tactics changed. These soldiers could lead assaults, break through fortifications, and act as walking artillery. Protection was excellent against most infantry weapons. The steel plates could deflect bullets that would rip through normal body armor. However, as the war dragged on through the late 2060s and into the 2070s, the Chinese military responded with heavier firepower, advanced weaponry, and strategies to counter the once invincible American armor. The T-45's shortcomings, its relative slowness, the weight and strain on its wearer, and limits to how much it could be further improved, started to show. The US military knew that the T-45, while formidable, was only the first step. A more advanced suit would be needed to maintain technological superiority. The pinnacle of pre-war design, T-51 power armor. Even as T-45 units were rolling off assembly lines and into battle, West Tech was hard at work on the next generation of power armor. The US government wanted a suit that corrected the T-45's flaws: better mobility, stronger protection, and more efficient power usage. This project was formally designated T-51 powered infantry armor. By 2069, the T-51 development program had become the single largest military R&D contract in the country. It was an ambitious undertaking, and it would take nearly a decade to bear fruit. Where the T-45 had been a rushed, stopgap solution using existing tech, the T-51 was to be a refined, purpose-built war machine. Scientists and engineers poured all their experience from the T-45 into the new design. Over the early 2070s, prototypes of the T-51 were built and tested, often in actual combat conditions. This was done in places like Fort Strong in Massachusetts, a U.S. Army testing facility, to work out issues in real-world scenarios. There were indeed problems. For example, one prototype tested in September 2075 had dramatically improved agility and protection. But when soldiers performed aerial drops or hard landings in the armor, they found it unstable. Troopers would sometimes tip over or fall when they hit the ground due to balance issues. To address this, engineers added gyroscopic stabilizers and shock absorbers to the armor's frame, helping keep the suit upright and the operator stable even when impacting the ground with force. Finally, in June 2076, the first production model T-51 suits were ready and deployed. They were sent straight to the front lines in China, where American forces had been bogged down fighting on the Chinese mainland since the invasion of 2074. The T-51 made an immediate impression. It outperformed the T-45 in every aspect: faster, more agile, better armored, and with longer endurance. A soldier in T-51 could move more freely, despite wearing a heavy suit, thanks to improved joint servos and a well-balanced frame. The armor plating was stronger, but also lighter due to advanced materials. The result was that American power-armored troops could now truly counter anything the enemy threw at them. The Chinese People's Liberation Army, already stretched thin, began to fall back in the face of squads of T-51-clad US soldiers. There are accounts of Chinese units that, upon seeing the distinctive silhouette of the T-51 and hearing the whir of its servos, would lose morale. Some soldiers even surrendered rather than face these armored juggernauts with their devastating miniguns and Gatling lasers. In the final months of the Sino-American War, the T-51 was crucial in pushing Chinese forces into retreat on all fronts. One of the most famous operations involving the T-51 was the Anchorage reclamation in January 2077. General Constantine Chase led American forces in liberating Anchorage, Alaska, which had been occupied by Chinese invaders for over a decade. The Americans spearheaded this assault with troops wearing winterized T-51B power armor, specially modified for sub-zero conditions, painted a snow camouflage white, and fitted with heaters. These armored soldiers crossed the frozen tundra and breached Chinese defenses that had held firm for years. Thanks to the protection of power armor, US casualties were minimal even as they disabled a Chinese projected energy shield and stormed the enemy positions. The liberation of Anchorage was a resounding success. It marked the turning of the tide in the war, essentially completing America's mission of reclaiming its soil. The Anchorage reclamation is often cited as the debut of the T-51 in the public eye, a moment when the world saw the full potential of power armor. In Fallout lore, this event is so iconic that a statue of an American T-51 power-armored soldier raising the flag is a celebrated image of victory. What made the T-51 so superior? The answer lies in its design and materials. Unlike the T-45's plain steel construction, the T-51's shell is composed of a polylaminate composite, a sophisticated lightweight armor plating. This composite could absorb an enormous amount of kinetic energy. Sources say over 2.5 kilojoules of energy could be absorbed without penetrating the armor. In practical terms, that means the T-51 could withstand powerful ballistic impacts and explosions far better than its predecessor. The armor's rounded organic curves were not just aesthetic, they helped deflect bullets and shrapnel, reducing the direct force taken. This rounded design was a deliberate improvement over the more old-fashioned boxy plates of the T-45. Additionally, the T-51 surface was coated with a thin layer of silver ablative material. This silvered coating served to reflect and disperse laser blasts and radiation. Energy weapons were becoming more common on the battlefield. The US was deploying laser rifles by this time, so having armor that could resist laser fire was a huge advantage. The T-51 basically wouldn't burn or melt easily under directed energy attacks. The beams would reflect or dissipate, sparing the suit serious damage. And for nuclear or chemical protection, the T-51 could be fully sealed and pressurized. With an internal air supply and filtration, a person in a T-51 suit could march through a radiated hotspot or a gas attack and remain unharmed, so long as the armor wasn't breached. The helmet of the T-51 was redesigned to be smaller and stronger. It was forged from a single piece of the composite material and included a robust neck ring that locked into the suit for an airtight seal. As with the T-45, the helmet had a bulletproof eye slit, although narrower, which itself provided better protection and auditory sensors, and it also featured a standard-issue headlamp and a flip-down targeting visor, the ocular lens, for improved aiming in all T-51 units. Inside the suit, the power plant and frame of the T-51 were also improved. The T-51 is powered by a back-mounted TX-28 microfusion pack, similar in concept to the T-45's reactor, but even more robust. This power pack generates some 60 kilowatts of energy, continuously feeding the high-torque hydraulics that give the armor its strength. The skeletal frame of the T-51, the internal structure that the plates attached to, was a marvel of engineering called the West Tech Power Armor Frame. It distributed weight and power efficiently, enabling the operator to move with surprising grace. The high-flow hydraulic system, high flow built into the frame, meant that the suit effectively carried its own weight and also amplified the wearer's strength tremendously. Soldiers in T-51 could run faster and jump higher than those in T-45, and they could lift heavy objects, even flip over a car or tear mounted guns out of emplacements, feats impossible for an unassisted human. However, to get the absolute best performance, each T-51 suit had to be custom fitted to its wearer. This was another difference from the more one-size-fits-all T-45. The T-51 was finely tuned for the individual soldier's body shape and size. When properly fitted and the operator fully trained, a T-51 felt like an extension of one's body. Veteran power armored troops often described moving in a T-51 as natural and fluid, almost like wearing a second skin of steel. One almost amusing but practical feature carried over from the T-45 is the waste recycling system. The T-51 armor, like the T-45, includes a mechanism to recycle the wearer's urine into drinkable water. This meant a soldier sealed in the suit could survive for extended periods, potentially weeks, without needing to exit for food or water, food in the form of internal rations, and water via the recycling system. For a protracted battle or operating in radioactive hot zones, this self-sufficiency could be life-saving. It underscores that these suits weren't just armor, but fully integrated life support systems. By all metrics, the T-51 was the apex of pre-war power armor design. It had a long development cycle that allowed West Tech to incorporate all the hard lessons from the battlefield use of the T-45. When people think of Fallout's power armor in its iconic form, the T-51 is often what comes to mind. It's the suit depicted on the cover of the original Fallout game, symbolizing the Brotherhood of Steel and the old world technology they hoard. In universe, the T-51 became the standard issue for elite units and was held in extremely high regard. It's said that even after the Great War, a suit of T-51 could be worth a fortune and confer a huge advantage to whoever possessed it. That said, the T-51 had one major drawback. It was expensive and difficult to produce. The cutting-edge materials and custom parts meant that manufacturing T-51 suits in large numbers was a slow process. The United States was engaged in multiple massive war efforts by 2076, not only fighting in China and Alaska, but also quelling unrest elsewhere, such as in annexed Canada, where American troops wearing power armor had to put down pockets of resistance. They simply couldn't get enough T-51 units to every battlefield fast enough. The T-60 power armor for the masses of soldiers, with the clock ticking and war escalating, the US military made a pragmatic decision. Instead of replacing all T-45 units with T-51, which was proving too slow to roll out, they would introduce another model of power armor that could be produced more rapidly and in greater numbers. This next model was the T-60 power armor. The T-60 began as an upgrade project on the older T-45 series. West Tech and the military took the familiar, proven chassis of the T-45 and sought to enhance it using some of the advancements from the T-51 program, but without requiring all new exotic materials. In essence, the T-60 was an evolutionary step, not as revolutionary as the T-51, but something that could be fielded quickly. By late 2076, right after the success at Anchorage, the T-60 power armor entered service, only a handful of months before the apocalypse came. The timing of the T-60's deployment is telling. American military planners knew that the war could reach a critical point soon, and indeed, nuclear tensions were rising. They deployed the T-60 domestically and in various theaters to bolster defenses and maintain order. It's noted in law that soldiers clad in T-60 armor were among those trying to keep peace and control riots on US soil on the very day the bombs fell, October 23, 2077. So by the Great War's end, the T-60 was actually one of the most common power armor models in active service. In fact, it's said that by that point, the T-60 was considered the most advanced armor to see wide use since the T-51, while a superior design was never as ubiquitous due to production limits. What are the characteristics of the T-60? Visually, the T-60 armor has a bulkier, somewhat more imposing frame than the earlier suits, with a distinctive squared-off helmet and thick shoulder plating. It retains a lot of the aesthetic language of the T-45. One can see it as a heavily upgraded T-45 with added layers of armor. The T-60 uses traditional material armor, hardened steel, and alloys, rather than the sophisticated composite of the T-51. This made it heavier, but also easier to mass produce using existing factories and techniques. In terms of protection, The T-60's raw defensive capability was very high. Its plates were thicker than those of the T-45, making it extremely resilient to gunfire and explosive shrapnel. However, because it forgoes some of the lightweight composite materials, the T-60 was not quite as nimble as the T-51. It struck a balance, easier to manufacture and deploy, yet offering better protection and power than the old T-45. You could think of it this way: T-51 was like a cutting-edge, top-of-the-line sports car built in limited numbers, whereas T-60 was a reliable, armored truck that could be built by the thousands. On the battlefield, a T-60 could absolutely hold its own and was more durable in extended fights, simply due to heavy armor mass. Its internal workings, the power frame, and servo muscles were refinements of the T-45 systems, likely tuned to handle the extra weight and provide more torque. One specific improvement, noted in some sources, is that the T-60 had an upgraded fusion power system, possibly a modified version of the TX-28 fusion core that was even more efficient. It needed a robust reactor because all that extra plating and the heavy servos would draw a lot of power. Nonetheless, field reports from the last days of the pre-war US Army indicate that T-60 units performed admirably, whether in anchoring battle lines abroad or patrolling city streets at home. A piece of lore from a Fallout 4 loading screen states that by the time of the Great War, the T-60 was considered the pinnacle of power armor that saw extensive active duty. This is partly a nod to the fact that the experimental next-gen armor, the X-01, which we'll discuss next, never got to be widely used before the world ended. So effectively, the T-60 was the last widely deployed iteration of US power armor pre-war. It's interesting to note that the introduction of the T-60 didn't make the T-51 obsolete. Rather, they served alongside each other. The most elite units might still get a T-51, while the rank-and-file power armored divisions got the easier-to-produce T-60. Combined, these suits gave the US a formidable armored core in those final months. We also see in post-war times, through the eyes of Fallout game protagonists, the T-60 suits are often found in National Guard armories or old military checkpoints, suggesting that many T-60 sets were distributed to domestic forces and reserves to prepare for the worst. In summary, the T-60 power armor represents the US military's push to industrialize and scale up power armor deployment. It might not have the mystique of the T-51's perfect engineering, but it was a practical and hard-hitting workhorse that saw a lot of action right up to the bitter end of civilization. Experimental and unseen advances. The X-01 prototype. As advanced as the T-51 and T-60 were, the US government had even more ambitious plans on the drawing board. War breeds innovation, and by late 2077, American scientists were experimenting with a radical new model of power armor that promised to eclipse all previous designs. This project was designated X-01, implying an experimental series, something outside the standard T-series naming convention. The existence of the X-01 was shrouded in secrecy. It was commissioned at the highest levels, reportedly by the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, as a black-budget research project. The X-01 power armor represented a bold departure from the established power armor design philosophy. Instead of simply incrementally improving the T-series, the engineers eschewed traditional design philosophies for something entirely new. Photos or records of the X-01 prototype, uncovered long after the war, show a suit that looks more advanced and alien compared to the familiar T-40 550-160 silhouette. The plating is angular and sleek, and the helmet has an eerie insect-like appearance, with a pair of glowing eye lens apertures instead of a visor slit. The overall profile of X-01 is somewhat more compact and form-fitting, yet clearly well-armored. It has a distinctive hunched hump on the back, which covers the head and presumably houses advanced sensors and additional protection for the wearer's neck, removing the exposed gap that earlier models had around the helmet and neck area. This design reduces weak points around the head, which was a known vulnerability in earlier suits. For instance, a direct hit to the neck joint or a lucky shot through the visor could be devastating. Internally, the X-01 utilized cutting-edge materials. Instead of the polylaminate composite of the T-51, the X-01's armor incorporated lightweight metal alloys reinforced with ceramic castings at key points. These choices likely gave it even greater defensive strength, while perhaps trimming some weight or bulk. The design was meant to optimize space and protection by using advanced materials. They could reduce the armor's profile, making it less bulky without sacrificing defense. Essentially, X-01 was aiming to be the ultimate balance of protection, mobility, and battlefield awareness. One of the most striking features was the helmet assembly of X-01. Gone was the human-like faceplate with a narrow window. Instead, the helmet presented a smooth, intimidating facade with two glowing eyepieces. These polarized eyepieces gave the operator a broad field of vision using cameras or optics, likely tied into an internal HUD heads-up display. This eyes of an insect look wasn't just stylistic, it actually provided superior visibility and target tracking compared to the single slit of older armors. Also, the angled surfaces of the helmet and chest were designed to deflect or ricochet incoming rounds more effectively. All in all, the X-01 looked less like a man in a suit and more like a futuristic, robotic warrior. It was power armor taken to its logical extreme. Development on X-01 began shortly before the Great War. It's implied that by the time the bombs fell in October 2077, the X-01 project had produced some technically functional prototypes. There are hints that a few prototype suits may even have been issued in very limited capacities, for example, to elite presidential bodyguards or as part of specialized corporate military programs. One notable story is that a single suit of X-01 was provided to the Nuka-Cola Corporation for something known as Project Cobalt. Nuka-Cola's scientists experimented with this suit, plating it with a strontium-90 based material, which was supposed to augment its resistance to radiation. This resulted in the so-called Quantum X-01, a variant named after Nuka-Cola Quantum, no doubt a marketing tie-in. While the strontium-90 plating idea proved it could dramatically increase armor resilience, it wasn't implemented widely before the war erupted. Despite being technically operational, the X-01 was plagued by numerous design issues during its prototype phase. This is often the case with experimental tech. Initial units might work, but not reliably enough for mass deployment. In the X-01's case, we don't know all the specifics. Possibly the power systems overheated, or the advanced materials were hard to produce, or the suits required extremely specialized maintenance. The Great War's outbreak in October 2077 halted any further development. In fact, the program was so secret that it's likely most of America, even most of the military, had no idea such an armor was being developed at all. When the world was bathed in nuclear fire, only a handful of X-01 units existed. Very few of these suits would have made it out of research facilities. However, crucially, the schematics and technical data for X-01 did survive. The lore tells us that the secretive group known as the Enclave, which we will discuss in detail soon, managed to secure copies of the X-01 plans as the bombs were falling. The Enclave, being the shadow organization of top US government and military officials, had access to many classified projects, and they certainly recognized the value of X-01. They took the designs with them into their bunkers and exile, intending to someday complete what the pre-war scientists had started. Post-war, the existence of X-01 remained mostly a myth to survivors, but a few suits did find their way into the world. For instance, in the ruins of the Commonwealth Fallout 4 setting, around the year 2287, the player can encounter fully functional X-01 armor suits at certain highly guarded locations. This implies that some prototypes or Enclave caches eventually ended up out in the wild. Additionally, the Brotherhood of Steel and even the Post-War Institute in Fallout 4 both got their hands on this tech. The Institute, a secretive group of scientists, by 2287 had developed their own modifications to the X-01 design. Even without having the original schematics, they created new polymers to coat the armor and built-in interface enhancements that could, for example, augment the user's intelligence or perception via the suit's systems. So, in summary, the X-01 power armor was the pinnacle of pre-war innovation that never saw full use due to Armageddon. It served as the ancestor of all advanced post-war power armors that would come later. For the lucky few who possess one in the post-war world, an X-01 suit is an incredible treasure, offering protection even beyond the revered T-51 and representing a piece of technology that could have been the next standard had civilization survived a bit longer. After the fall, power armor in the post-war wasteland. On October 23, 2077, the world ended in nuclear fire. The Great War's atomic devastation wiped out nations in mere hours. In the aftermath, the infrastructure that supported high-tech military projects was largely gone. No more factories churning out new power armor. In fact, very few people outside of military survivors even knew how to maintain these complex suits. The power armor that remained immediately became some of the most coveted equipment in the wasteland. With governments gone and armies shattered, whoever could claim a working power armor suit held a significant advantage in the harsh new world. In those early days after the war, several groups formed around surviving military personnel and governmental figures. These groups took it upon themselves to secure remaining technology. Two of the most important factions in Fallout lore when it comes to power armor are the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave. Let's examine each and how they preserved and advanced power armor after the apocalypse. Brotherhood of Steel, Knights in high-tech armor. The Brotherhood of Steel traces its origins to shortly after the Great War. In California, a U.S. Army captain named Roger Maxson and his troops survived the nuclear exchange, having been stationed at a remote bunker, the Mariposa military base. Disillusioned by the government and horrified by the experiments they saw at Mariposa, Maxson led his people into the desert, eventually establishing the Brotherhood of Steel at the Lost Hills bunker. The Brotherhood formed around the credo that the old world's technology was both mankind's greatest asset and its biggest threat. They elected to hoard advanced tech, protect it, and prevent it from being misused by the scattered remnants of humanity. From the beginning, power armor was central to the Brotherhood's identity and operations. Many of the founding members were military, so they brought with them the skills to use and fix power armor suits. They had access to a stockpile of arms and armor, including power armor, from the bases they came from. The Brotherhood reorganized themselves like a quasi-religious knightly order, and in that analogy, power armor became their sacred armor, their knight shining if slightly rusted plate. In the decades and centuries after the war, the Brotherhood of Steel became one of the very few groups capable of maintaining and even repairing power armor. They prized above all the suits of T-51 they had, as well as any other models they could recover. Brotherhood Knights and Paladins, their ranks equivalent to soldiers, underwent rigorous training to use power armor effectively. Wearing one was considered a privilege and honor. Not every low-ranking scribe or initiate got a suit. The Brotherhood had limited numbers of these armors, after all, but those who did don them were nearly unstoppable in the wastes. On the West Coast, where the Brotherhood first rose, they operated through Fallout 1 and 2, mostly in T-51B armor suits, which remained highly effective even against post-war threats. Raiders with pipe guns, or even super mutants with heavy weapons, struggled to penetrate the thick composite armor of a Brotherhood paladin. This made the Brotherhood a dominant force when they encountered others, often inspiring awe or fear. To many wastelanders, the sight of a Brotherhood knight in power armor was the stuff of legends, a walking relic of the old world, bristling with guns, impervious to attack, sometimes appearing out of the dust storms to strike down monsters or claim technology. As time went on, the Brotherhood spread to other regions. When they sent expeditions to places like the East Coast, those chapters brought power armor with them. For example, the Eastern Brotherhood of Steel, led by Elder Owen Lyons in Fallout 3, arrived in the Washington, D.C. area around 2255. They initially had a limited supply of the more advanced T-51, and mostly were equipped with older T-45D suits for their paladins and knights. It's implied that the West Coast elders didn't fully trust Lyon's mission, and thus didn't give him the best gear, so his troops used T-45 suits, which by that point were nearly 200-year-old designs. Nevertheless, even these antiquated power armors gave Lyon's Brotherhood a tremendous edge in the capital wasteland. They were able to battle hordes of super mutants roaming the ruins of DC, hold their ground, and establish fortified citadels. Later, through both salvage and perhaps trade with Western chapters, the DC Brotherhood also acquired some T-51B suits. One notable set was a treasured relic, a winterized T-51B from a military simulation that a Brotherhood outcast had recovered. By the time of Fallout 4, the Commonwealth, 2287, the Brotherhood of Steel, that arrives from the east, is shown using predominantly T-60 power armor. This indicates a few things. After the events of Fallout 3, the Eastern Brotherhood likely managed to secure better equipment, perhaps through aligning with the government's armory at Adams Air Force Base or other Enclave caches. The Brotherhood chapter under Elder Maxon, Arthur Maxon, leading the East Coast in Fallout 4, has standardized on T-60 suits for its soldiers. They even have the ability to customize them with distinctive Brotherhood paint jobs and insignia. It's likely that they have some means of producing spare parts, or at least refurbishing the old ones, given how many knights in their ranks are armored. One point of lore repeatedly emphasized by the Brotherhood is that outsiders are almost never allowed to use power armor without joining the Brotherhood or proving themselves. In Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas, for example, the player character can't just hop into a power armor unless they undergo special training, often provided by the Brotherhood. This is a nod to both game mechanics and lore. These suits require knowledge to operate. The Brotherhood tightly controlled that knowledge. In New Vegas, set in 2281 on the West Coast, the Brotherhood there, a hidden chapter in the Mojave, will train someone in power armor, use only if they earn their trust. The Brotherhood's stance is that advanced technology, especially something as potent as power armor, in the wrong hands, could lead to another apocalypse or the empowerment of tyrants. So they see themselves as the guardians of power armor, using it, but also preventing undeserving groups from obtaining it. However, the Brotherhood is not the only keeper of power armor in the post-war world. Another faction had even greater resources and a direct lineage to the pre-war military R&D, the Enclave. The Enclave, an advanced power armor. The Enclave is, effectively, what became of the top-tier US government and military leadership that escaped the Great War. Key political figures, high-ranking military officers, and brilliant scientists had a contingency plan. They retreated to remote secure locations like the Poseidon oil rig in the Pacific Ocean, as well as secret installations such as the White Spring Bunker in Appalachia. There, insulated from the nuclear fire, they intended to wait out the worst of the fallout and eventually rebuild America under their own vision. Unlike the Brotherhood, who were outsiders that gradually gathered equipment, the Enclave started with a cache of pre-war tech and the know-how to use it. In the early decades after the war, the Enclave had access to standard power armors like the T-51. In fact, Enclave records indicate that for a time, their soldiers used modified T-51B suits as their main combat armor. This makes sense. They would have evacuated with some of the best gear available in 2077, which at the time was the T-51 and T-60. However, the Enclave had bigger ambitions. They had the schematics for the experimental X-01, and given enough time, they intended to build something even better from that foundation. Essentially, the Enclave saw themselves as the rightful heirs to all US technological projects, and that included pushing power armor beyond what the old government had done. According to later discovered documents, the Fallout Bible and in-game terminals, the Enclave eventually restarted the advanced power armor development program that the Great War had cut short. Starting around the year 2198, at their secure bases, Enclave scientists began refining the X-01 prototype design. Progress was slow. Early attempts didn't get far, perhaps due to limited resources or internal priorities. But by 2215, the Enclave president issued a mandate to prioritize the development of a new power armor for Enclave forces. With this high-level push, within 5 years, they had done it. Around 2220, the Enclave produced the first model of what they called advanced power armor. This first production version is often referred to by fans as Enclave Power Armor Mark I. In Fallout 2 set in 2241, this is the black, formidable armor that Enclave soldiers wear. It's a direct descendant of the X-01 prototype, polished and improved for mass production, albeit mass production on a small scale, since the Enclave's population and facilities were limited. The Advanced Power Armor Mark I has a shiny black finish with a distinctive insectoid helmet with green eyepieces often depicted. It represents a huge leap in protection and strength, surpassing even the T-51. By the time the Chosen One, the protagonist of Fallout 2, encounters the Enclave, these suits make Enclave soldiers nearly invincible to regular wasteland guns, One practically needs anti-tank weapons or similar firepower to take them down. Enclave propaganda and the sheer sight of these armors often cowed any would-be resistance to the average wastelander. An Enclave trooper in advanced power armor must have looked like a monster or a robotic overlord descending upon them. Not one to rest on success, the Enclave improved the design further a few years later. By 2242, they had rolled out the Advanced Power Armor Mark II. The Mark II, which the player can also find in Fallout 2's endgame, featured even stronger armor and better mobility. Visually, it had some differences, like a slightly altered helmet and additional plating. In Fallout 2, it's represented as an even more durable suit. It's said that the Mark II was developed at the Enclave's primary base, the oil rig, and at their mainland outpost, the Navarro base in California. This Mark II was the pinnacle of Enclave armor at the time, and was issued to their top soldiers and guards. For instance, Frank Horrigan, the final boss of Fallout 2, wears a custom oversized version of advanced power armor that's akin to a Mark II, modified for a super mutant's giant frame. Let's talk about what makes the Enclave's advanced power armor so formidable. It carries forward the features of the X-01 advanced alloy construction, superior joint articulation, built-in life support, and that menacing helmet with advanced optics. The Mark I and II are described as having improved hydraulics and servo motors that enhance the operator's strength beyond even what the T-51 could offer. They also include conveniences like auto-gyros that can lock the suit in a standing position, meaning an Enclave soldier could sleep standing up in armor, or the suit can remain upright in storage. The suits have integrated air conditioning for comfort, quite a luxury in the sometimes sweltering sealed armor environment. Like the T-51, they have a waste recycling system. Communications gear was upgraded too. Enclave armor features internal communicators and likely a built-in HUD that links to their advanced weapon systems and sensors. Another thing the Enclave did was emblazon their power armor with their insignia and rank markings. They were a true army, not just scavengers, so each suit was properly maintained, numbered, and marked. The Enclave soldiers in advanced power armor were essentially the stormtroopers of the post-war world, enforcing the Enclave's will with ruthlessness. They believed themselves superior to the irradiated survivors they encountered, and their gear reinforced that belief. For a while, it seemed nothing in the wasteland could challenge the Enclave in their high-tech shells. However, events in Fallout 2241 to 2242 showed that technology alone isn't everything. The Enclave's main base was destroyed in 2242 when the Chosen One infiltrated the oil rig and triggered its self-destruct, thwarting their genocidal plan to wipe out all mutated life. The Enclave remnants on the mainland, particularly at Navarro, were then confronted by the New California Republic's army and the Brotherhood of Steel. Without their leadership and with limited numbers, the Enclave forces were overrun at places like Navarro. By the year 2246, many of their soldiers died, and their valuable armor suits likely taken or lost, and some went into hiding. Yet, that wasn't the absolute end of the Enclave. A group of Enclave personnel fled eastward, eventually establishing new strongholds, one at Raven Rock and another at Adams Air Force Base, around what used to be Washington, D.C. These Enclave survivors licked their wounds for a few decades and then emerged in Fallout 3:2277 to try to claim control of the capital wasteland. By that time, they still had their advanced power armor, and they even introduced another new variant, sometimes nicknamed Enclave Power Armor Mark II, though confusingly, in Fallout 3, the Enclave Soldier's armor is often just called Enclave Power Armor and looks very similar to the Fallout 2 Mark II design. In Fallout 3's Broken Steel expansion, the Enclave even deploys a new heavy infantry armor colloquially known as Hellfire Power Armor, a specialized suit designed for extreme combat conditions, particularly hardened against heat and radiation. The Hellfire armor is bulky, with a flame-resistant coating, and is used by flamethrower-wielding Enclave troopers. Lore-wise, this Hellfire armor is described as the pinnacle of post-war power armor design by the Enclave, suggesting it might be considered a Mark III of sorts. It was developed out of necessity after the Enclave relocated and lost their previous research facilities. Ultimately, the Enclave was defeated again in the capital wasteland, thanks in large part to the Brotherhood of Steel and a certain lone wanderer. Their numbers dwindled and their bases destroyed, which pretty much marked the end of the Enclave as a major faction. But in the process, many Enclave suits of advanced power armor were now scattered or in the hands of victors. For instance, some ex-Enclave personnel, like the remnants in Fallout New Vegas, former Enclave soldiers who went into hiding, kept their suits. In New Vegas, you can find the Remnants Power Armor, which is essentially an Enclave Advanced Power Armor Mark II that belonged to survivors of Navarro. That suit is still considered one of the best armors available to a player, even decades after its creation, which is a testament to how advanced the Enclave's tech was. Other factions and users of power armor, while the Brotherhood of Steel and the Enclave are the most famous power armor users, they weren't the only ones. In the 2 centuries following the war, various groups managed to get hold of power armor or parts of it, with mixed success in using it. One noteworthy example is the New California Republic, NCR. The NCR grew into a large federation of settlements and states on the West Coast by the time of Fallout New Vegas, around 2281. They're a major power. The NCR, being a conventional army, didn't have the Brotherhood's level of expertise with power armor. In fact, they came into conflict with the Brotherhood in the past. The Brotherhood tried to stop the NCR from using too much technology, leading to the NCR Brotherhood War. The NCR did capture or inherit some power armor, especially during or after that war with the Brotherhood. However, lacking the training and perhaps the abundance of fusion cores needed to fully utilize the suits, the NCR resorted to creating salvaged power armor for their heavy infantry. In New Vegas, the NCR heavy troopers wear what's called NCR salvaged power armor. These are pieces of T-45 or T-51 armor that have been modified to be worn without the internal power frame. Essentially, the NCR technicians stripped out the servo motors and some of the heavy components, turning the suit into a very cumbersome but high protection conventional armor that someone can don without power assistance. The NCR soldiers in salvaged armor are well protected against bullets due to the thick plates, but because the suit is no longer powered, they move slowly and can't carry additional huge weapons with ease. It's basically like putting a man in a steel coffin, great for defense, but no enhancement to strength. This approach shows the limitations of groups that didn't have the Brotherhood's secret knowledge. They could copy the look of power armor, but not the functionality. The NCR also didn't train their troops in the use of active power armor, or have many fusion cores to spare, so this was their workaround. Raiders and scavengers in the wasteland also got creative with power armor. By the time of Fallout 4 in the Commonwealth, 2 centuries of scavenging meant that a lot of old power armor frames and parts lay forgotten in military depots or battlefields. Local raider gangs sometimes stumbled on these frames and managed to get them running, especially since Fallout 4 established that virtually anyone can use a power armor frame if they have a fusion core and know how to start it up. The raiders typically didn't have the resources to maintain these suits properly, nor access to pristine armor plates. Instead, they bolted on scrap metal, spare parts, and improvised their own raider power armor variants. These raider armors looked jury-rigged: exposed pistons, sheets of corrugated metal as armor pieces, spikes and bloody handprints for intimidation. They are crude compared to military-grade suits, but they still grant raiders some degree of augmented strength and protection. A raider in a patched-together power armor might not be as tough as a Brotherhood paladin in T60, but he's still far more dangerous than a regular human in leather. Raider power armor demonstrates that as time passed, the secret of operating power armor did seep out beyond just the Brotherhood or Enclave. By 2287, even gangs could manage it with some trial and error. In Fallout 4's Commonwealth, there's also a memorable group called the Atom Cats. They are basically a gang of eccentric mechanics who love power armor, almost like 1950s hot rod enthusiasts. The Atom Cats have a garage where they souped up power armor suits, painted them with flames and custom designs, and traded repair services. They treat power armor with a kind of reverence similar to car culture. This is a lighter-hearted example of how power armor knowledge started spreading. These aren't soldiers or tech hoarders, but they figured out how to fix up suits and make them look flashy. The Atom Cats presumably learned through salvaging technical manuals or by picking the brain of some ex-Brotherhood or military technician. Another important post-war development in power armor came from remnants of the US government beyond the Enclave. In West Virginia, the setting of Fallout 76, which takes place in the year 2102, not long after the war, we have the story of the Garahan Mining Company and their excavator power armor. This is an example of power armor used in industry rather than combat. Before the war, mining companies saw the potential to use powered armor suits to protect miners and enhance their strength for labor. Garahan's EX-17 excavator power armor was designed to allow miners to dig deeper, carry heavier loads of ore, and be safe from rockfalls or toxic gas. It was painted yellow and black, looking much like a big industrial machine rather than a military outfit. Interestingly, one of the lead engineers on the excavator project was Harold Frost, a man who had been part of the US Army's power armor research and worked on the T-45 program. He was hired away by Garahan to bring his expertise to the civilian sector. The excavator armor had its own challenges. Terminal entries from Garahan's headquarters reveal that the team had to solve issues like the chassis cracking under the stress of constant drilling and the reactor overheating due to the suit's heavy power demands. They experimented with using black titanium, a rare and strong material, to reinforce the arms, and even ended up using an ultracite-fueled reactor to give the suit the power it needed. Ultracite is a highly potent radioactive element found in Appalachia, crucial in Fallout 76's story for powering advanced tech. In the end, the excavator project succeeded in producing at least several working suits. Just before the bombs fell, Garahan was about to showcase their excavator armor as a revolutionary mining tool, meant to outperform competitors' automated mining robots. But the Great War cut that short. In the post-war environment, survivors in Appalachia, Fallout 76, discovered these excavator suits. They proved extremely useful for wasteland scavengers, as the suits not only provide good protection, but also amplify carrying capacity, just as intended for miners hauling ore. It's a reminder that power armor's use wasn't limited to soldiers. It was a versatile technology that could have transformed civilian industries too. Additionally, the Brotherhood of Steel chapter that formed in Appalachia after the war, chronicled in Fallout 76, did some power armor innovation of their own. Facing a horrific threat known as the Scorched and Scorch Beasts, irradiated monster bats, the Appalachian Brotherhood needed armor that could shield soldiers from intense radiation and sonic attacks. They developed the ultrasight power armor by incorporating the rare ultrasight element into T-51's T-60 style armor to enhance its protective capabilities against these new threats. The ultrasight power armor is basically a post-war variant that can be seen as equal or slightly superior to a standard T-51, crafted specifically to combat a unique post-war enemy. It's a great example of how necessity drove innovation even after the old world fell. The survivors continued to iterate on power armor technology, albeit on a smaller localized scale. We should also mention the mysterious T-65 power armor, a set introduced in Fallout 76's lore. The T-65 was developed, at least on paper, by the pre-war Secret Service as an ultimate defensive armor for their agents guarding Vault 79, a secret gold vault. It was said to have been barely entering production by the time of the war, making it essentially another prototype like the X-01 that never got wide deployment. In the Wastelanders storyline, around 2103, the designs for the T-65 are found in Vault 79, and the armor can be produced with great effort. The T-65 is extremely heavy and offers arguably the highest ballistic and energy protection of any power armor yet seen, meaning in pure stats it outclasses even X-01 or the Enclave armor. This suggests that America had multiple parallel projects for power armor, the military's X-01, and perhaps the Secret Service's T-65, focusing on different aspects. The T-65 might have been oriented for defensive engagements, like protecting vaults or high-value facilities, rather than battlefield versatility. In any case, T-65 is exceedingly rare, basically unheard of outside that one vault, reinforcing that many advanced ideas were lost or locked away by the war. Lastly, throughout the wasteland, various unique suits and modifications have appeared. There have been things like Tesla variants of power armor, which integrate electromagnetic coils that diffuse energy weapon hits. The Enclave had Tesla armor modifications to their advanced suits. You can see those in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, with arcs of electricity dancing on the armor. Some Brotherhood splinter groups, like the Midwest Brotherhood seen in Fallout Tactics, albeit non-canon to the main series, created their own custom power armor types as well, including bizarre iterations, like a Vault-Tec power armor in a non-canon game, which implied Vault-Tec also had prototypes. Even a super mutant like Marcus, an NPC in New Vegas, humorously remarks that he once saw a Brotherhood paladin so heavily armored he was more a walking tank than a man. Power armor has captured the imagination of everyone in the wasteland. It represents both the glory of the old world and the dangerous power that old technology can give. Conclusion. Through the ages of Fallout, from the desperate battlefields of Anchorage to the dusty roads of post-nuclear America, power armor has stood as a symbol of strength, ingenuity, and sometimes tyranny. We've seen how it was born in a crucible of war, the T-45 turning the tide against communist invaders, the T-51 perfecting the art of personal armor, and the T-60, ensuring those advantages reached every corner of the US military. We uncovered the secretive attempts to push the envelope further with the X-01, a dream of the next generation that only just began to materialize when the world collapsed. Yet, even atomic fire couldn't wipe out power armor. Instead, these mechanized suits became coveted heirlooms of the past, preserved by those with the foresight or fortune to have them. The Brotherhood of Steel donned the armor like the knights of a new dark age, using it to enforce their will and protect humanity's technological legacy. The Enclave, self-styled successors of the US government, advanced the science of power armor to produce terrifying new suits that nearly brought the wasteland to heel under their authoritarian vision. And beyond those major players, power armor found its way into the hands of wanderers, raiders, and dreamers. Whether it was a scrappy scavenger jury-rigging steel plates onto a rusty frame, or a group of idealistic mechanics painting flames on a refurbished T-60, people continued to find value in these suits. Each power armor frame in the wasteland tells a story of the soldier who originally wore it, of the journey it took through the ruins, and of the new owner who stumbled upon it years later. Imagine for a moment a lone traveler in the hush of the wasteland night, stumbling into an abandoned military bunker. Their flashlight dances across a hulking shape in the gloom, a suit of power armor, silent and waiting, paint peeling but circuitry still humming faintly with residual power. To that traveler, discovering this relic is like finding a mythical artifact. With some repairs, a new fusion core, and a lot of learning, they could stride out into the dawn in that armor, transformed into a one-person army. It's a romantic image that captures why power armor remains such a beloved element of Fallout lore. It symbolizes the enduring power of human innovation, even in the face of destruction, and the idea that even in a ruined world, the tools of the old civilization can grant someone the strength to become a hero or a tyrant. As we conclude our journey through the history of Fallout's power armor, we see that these suits are not just gear or items, they are characters in their own right. They carry the legacy of the pre-war world on their steel shoulders. They remind everyone that once mankind reached great heights of technological prowess, and in the right hands, they might just be the key to building a better future out of the ashes, or at least protecting those who try. Thank you for joining me in this deep exploration of power armor lore. I hope you found this journey informative and immersive. If you enjoyed this storytelling and lore dive, remember to subscribe to Knight's Embrace for more calm and detailed lore videos. Whether you seek knowledge or just a gentle story to fall asleep to, we'll be here sharing the tales of the wasteland's most fascinating mysteries. Good night, and Steel be with you.